This video is brought to you by the University Writing Center, a unit of the Department of Rhetoric and Writing at the University of Texas at Austin. You can contact us at uwc.utexas.edu.
Hi, Mac.
Hey, Claudio.
Are you ready to have a discussion for the University Writing Center on arrangement?
Sounds good. Arrangement's tough.
To start off, like in the textbook Becoming Rhetorical, Jodie Nicotra, she addresses arrangement briefly when she is talking about organization in the revision process. So I want to start by asking you, how do you make sense of arrangement?
Arrangement to me, at its most basic level, is how do you structure the essay, which means how do you present the information to the audience in a way that not only makes sense, but also sort of meets them where they are, that sort of can consider what are their expectations, what's their perspective, what's their sort of default position toward the topic you're going to be talking about. So when we're talking about arrangement, we're really talking about how do you present the information in a way that will be rhetorically effective, that'll be persuasive to them.
So how do you make sense of Nicotra discussing organization in terms of revision then?
Well, I think that makes sense. I mean, like a lot of people, think that everything should be reconsidered during revision, right? And for me, the revision process is really where you start to pivot from more writer-based prose, or sort of the draft or your free writes that were for you, right? You needed to do it in a certain way for it to make sense. You had to work through things in a certain way. And that's great because it gets you a draft or it gets you multiple drafts. But in the revision process, you also need to pivot from that writer-based prose for you to reader-based prose. So the same information can be packaged differently. So just because you needed to find it or discover it or think through it or whatever it is in a certain structure, a certain order, that doesn't necessarily mean that the readers want to receive that information in the same order. So once you recognize that, you realize that the revision process is really where you start to think of the audience more than maybe you had when you were drafting.
So what did you say are the advantages of thinking of structure in different moments of the writing process?
Well, I mean, just because it's important in revision doesn't mean you don't also think about it earlier on too. I mean, I'm not a huge outliner. Sometimes I wish I were more of one, and maybe should be, but a lot of people outline things pretty much every single topic sentence. And sometimes they can kind of stick to those. Other times in the revision process, they break from them and realize they need to rearrange things. So you can certainly be thinking about arrangement and structure as you're drafting. You can think about it at any stage of writing. But for me, the important thing is just that constant sort of recursive work of what do you want to be saying, and then analyzing the essay, the draft, your revised versions to see if it is doing what you actually want it to do, which is affecting an audience in an advantageous way.
That's a very good point. But how would you say that the structure affects the essay?
Yeah, I don't think you can talk about an essay without talking about structure. It'd be like talking about a house without talking about structure. It doesn't exist without it. But for me, one of the most important things we can still think about is the fact that structure or arrangement isn't one size fits all, right? You're always going to have a different writing situation, whether it's a different class, assignment, instructor, audience, or whatever the argument, whatever it is. So within that, you need to be able to be a little flexible. You need to always be thinking about, like we're saying, what is a sort of rhetorical effect of how you present information? So for example, let's say you're writing an argument to a hostile audience, or at least an audience that might not be receptive of what it is you're trying to say, whether that's a class or some outside audience, right? So in that situation, maybe delaying your thesis a little bit might be a good idea, because if you introduce it early like you would in a normal introduction, you might turn people off, right? But at the same time, you can't know 100% of the time that that's always the right way to arrange an essay. It depends on the situation. It depends on what you need in that moment. So the point is really just to consider all the context around it, and you constantly are revising, rethinking of what you're doing. And arrangement is a big thing. It's something that I think people are actually resistant to in the revision process, because you kind of, you get a draft done and you think, oh, I'm done. And all I need to do is these little edits. And you don't want to do structure because it's a big undertaking. But for me, those big undertakings in revision, that actual revising, revisioning of the essay, the rewriting of it, so to speak,
Mhm.
is sort of the most important part of the writing process, at least for me.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. Well, I'll keep that in mind in our future videos.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
You can find information about the University Writing Center at uwc.utexas.edu.